Good afternoon and welcome to the stream. Uh, Nice to have you here. I'm Natalie MacLeese. I'm founder of Aardvark, an accessibility testing platform. And I do this live stream every other Wednesday afternoon, my time. And we cover a variety of different accessibility topics. So if you want to learn about accessibility, it doesn't matter what level you are or what specific role you have. We cover everything from every angle. So today is a pretty developer facing stream. So we're going to be looking at how to properly build out a set of tabs. So tabs are one of the most common widgets used online. I'm sure that they are on maybe almost every website or pretty close to it. And they get used everywhere. And they seem really easy. They seem really straightforward. But like anything else that gets used all the time, they frequently get coded incorrectly from an accessibility point of view, which is why we're going to dig in today into how to build those correctly. All right, so we're going to, I say accessible tabs from scratch. Of course, you don't want to sit here and watch me type character by character a bunch of HTMLs. So I do have some starting files that we're going to work from. So it's a little bit less boring, a little less like watching grass grow or watching paint dry, right? Just slightly more exciting. So you should know that the tabs that come with a lot of component libraries actually have some issues for accessibility. And sometimes that's something that you can fix and sometimes it's not. But testing the accessibility of a component library before you put it to use is something that's really important to do, a really important habit to build. Sometimes you're on a team, you work for a company, you don't always get a chance to influence that decision, but at least you can have a document that outlines what you know the shortcomings of the platform are, or the component library rather. And you can also see if there's something you can do about it. If it's an open source project, can you commit a pull request? Can you file a ticket if it's one of the paid ones? Can you file a ticket with the company that created it? So there's a lot of different ways that we could influence the accessibility of publicly available component libraries. And we don't always take advantage of those. And I think if more of us spoke up more often, requesting or even demanding that things like component libraries were accessible, I think we might see more movement happening in the market. So we have done some previous streams on Aria, and today we're not talking about Aria kind of abstractly. We're actually going to be digging in and typing out Aria attributes and things like that in the code. We're going to really dig into it today and building the whole thing, and I'll demo it, and I'll demo how it works with the keyboard, and I'll demo how it works with screen reader. I'm on my Mac today, so it would be VoiceOver that we'd be using for the demo. But by the end of today, by the end of the hour, so the stream is only an hour long, by the end of the hour, you should walk away knowing the roles, the attributes, and the keyboard behavior that a real tab component should have to be fully accessible, and how to test any tab component, whether it's one you've built or a library or a component library that you're using, how to test if it actually works, if it's actually accessible. All right, so let's take a look real quick at the code that I've got here open on the screen. So I've called this stage 0, the naive version, and let's go ahead and open that in the browser. I hadn't used CodePen in a while, and I was very surprised yesterday at how robust it's gotten to be. So you can actually have multiple files. So I think it's going to make my demo here a lot easier to do. I don't have to have multiple different CodePens to show different stages of the project. So, all right, so here's our naive tabs. And this is where a lot of libraries will stop. And you might think, well, that seems to work fine. Like you click on each of those tabs and it loads the associated content, right? And my example tabs here are something that you might see in an e-commerce shop. And you might think, well, what's the problem? Like those seem to work just fine. Well, there's a few problems here. One, these don't work as expected for a keyboard-only user, and they also do not work as expected for a screen reader user. And there are other types of assistive technology that would also be impacted here. So that's what we want to be thinking about, that these tabs might look fine, but there's a significant portion of users for whom these aren't going to function at all, and some for whom they could probably get them working if they're tech savvy, but they don't work as expected. So let's talk about what that expected behavior is. So let me demo this with a keyboard real quick. So if I tab into the tab component, what I would generally expect to happen is that I would use the arrow keys to move to the other tabs in the tab component. And I'm pressing the right arrow key right now, and you can see it's not doing anything in the demo. Left arrow key doesn't do anything. The home key, the end key, like they just don't do anything. So what actually happens here is if I hit tab, I can move to the different tabs. And if you're not familiar with navigating web interfaces with a keyboard, you might think that's fine, but that is actually not the expected keyboard behavior for a set of tabs. I would expect to tab into the component, which is a general pattern that we use across all different types of interactive components. You tab into the component, you use arrow keys to navigate once you are inside the component, and then you hit the tab key to exit the component. So that is the general expected behavior, not just for tabs, but for an accordion, for a select drop down, for autocomplete, like combo box type thing, for a date picker, for all of those things. The expected behavior is you tab in, you use arrow keys to navigate once you're inside, and then tab back out. So this already breaks that convention. Now, if I tab to the shipping tab and I hit enter, it does load the shipping tab. So it's not completely broken for a keyboard-only user, but like I said, it's not the expected behavior. So they're going to have to fiddle around and realize like, oh, hey, this doesn't work the way that I expected. And they're going to have to figure out how it actually does work, which is inconvenient and it takes extra time. And then let me fire up a screen reader user and make sure that I can get the screen reader inside this tab here. So let's give that a try. Give me 1 second. Oh.
Accessible tabs from scratch, Google Chrome, Natalie, and Digit 2, window.
All right, so if you've watched my streams before, my advice is if you're going to learn how to use a screen reader, the first thing you should learn is how to make it stop talking. With VoiceOver, it is hitting the control key, so the bottom left button on your keyboard. You can just hit that at any time. It will stop talking until you interact with it again. If you interact with it again, it might start talking again, but you can hit that control key anytime. And then, of course, you have to know how to turn it back off, which is the command F5. Okay, which is the same as how you turn it on. All right, so it looks like I'm already in this tabs area. So let me see what I can do here to navigate these tabs with the screen reader.
GitHub Desktop.
Whoops.
GitHub Chrome. Accessible tabs from scratch, Google Chrome, Natalie, and Digit 2, window, pen, frame, space with applications, Chrome and code. You are currently on a frame. To enter the web area, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow, in pen, frame, heading level 1, stage 0, then looks like description, button. You are currently on a button.
Okay, so one good thing is we see that description, our tab, right, is a button. So that's good. That's how that should be marked up. So if you're not familiar, links take you someplace, buttons do something. So in this case, we're toggling the visibility of different panels of the tabs. So a button is the correct choice here, and I do have a button. So let's go ahead and see what happens if I press that button. So I press the button, and if you can see the screen, then you can tell that the tab actually did change to the description tab as expected, but you heard nothing at all coming from the screen reader. So let's go ahead and try moving to the shipping tab instead.
Shipping button. You are currently on a button inside of a.
So we also hear that we're not hearing anything about this being tabs. So all we know is there's a button that says shipping on it. And I click that button, which I'll do in just a second, and we'll see what happens. So I don't know if the little button clicky sound is coming through on the live stream. There's like a little clicky sound that lets me know I did go ahead and click that button. And again, if you can visually see the screen, you can see that I did switch to the shipping tab, but a screen reader user heard nothing about that, right? And remember, as a screen reader user, if I can't see the screen, I don't even know that I'm in a set of tabs. All I know is that I've stumbled across 3 buttons that happen to be in the interface called description, shipping, and returns. And I click those buttons, and as far as I could tell, nothing happens. Now, I might be able to kind of navigate around the screen and maybe figure out that those are tabs, but it's going to take quite a lot of time, and it's going to be super annoying and not super helpful. So let me turn the screen reader back off.
Voiceover off.
And let's go through the code that I've got here, and we'll talk about what we could do to actually improve that experience for our keyboard only users and our screen reader users. And as I mentioned, those improvements are also going to improve things for users of other types of assistive technology as well. All right, so in my code, I have a div with a class of tabs that's wrapping the entire tabs area. So the actual individual tabs, as well as what we would call the tab panel or the content of each tab area, that's called our tab panel. And inside of that div, I've got another div, and that one is called tab buttons. And it contains our 3 buttons. So button, button, button. And I have a description button, a shipping button, and returns button. These all have a class of tab. And we see that they also have a data attribute. So they all have a data panel attribute that identifies them as panel description, panel ship, and panel returns. And sorry, it's panel desk, DESC. So we've abbreviated that one because developers, listen, it's your job to type, but I know we all hate doing it. So anytime we can abbreviate anything, we're going to do it. All right, so which is why we have ship instead of shipping and DESC instead of description. So that's just how, like, realistically how things are going to happen. Right, and then I've got a div with a class of panel and an ID of panel desk, right? So description, basically with my content of that description tab. So over in the browser, if I click that, I can see that it loads this H2 in this paragraph that I have coded over here. And then I've got a div for the shipping information, and I've got a div for the returns information. Each of those has an ID. It has content. And then here's the closing div for that whole like div class tabs that wraps that whole component in a container. And this might all look fine, but we're missing some critical information here. So let's go through and get that added. All right. I think I got behind in my notes here. So yes, I already did all that part. So let's go to this part where we actually go through and fix. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead through this, and I'll show you where we add aria. And of course, now you might be thinking, wait, the first rule of aria is don't use aria, which is true. You shouldn't use aria unless you need to. And Unfortunately, there is no semantic native HTML element for tabs. For as common as they are, like I said, I feel like they're on nearly every website out there. For as common a UX design pattern that is, there is no semantic way to build these. So this is a case where we have to use Aria to create tabs. We don't have another way of doing it and making sure that it's accessible. So this is a case where we do actually need to use Aria. It's going to help us out a lot. And it's going to help communicate that we're in tabs to different types of assistive technology. And then we're going to have some JavaScript that's going to help us support the expected keyboard interactions that our keyboard-only users are going to be expecting. All right, so what are the aria roles that we need to actually build a set of tabs? So the first thing is that this container that holds our whole tabs component, we need to add a role for that of a tab list. Oops, you need a space. Role equals tab list. Okay, so a role of tab list on the container. So now we're communicating, hey, we've got a set of tabs here. On each of the individual tabs, we want to add a role of tab. So that's easy enough. So each of these 3 buttons, I'm going to add a role of tab. Now, of course, before I add this role, I'm going to go ahead and just copy that and paste it. Before I add that role, these, of course, already have a role because they have their native semantic HTML role of button. I am overriding that and saying these particular buttons, they're no longer buttons. They are now tabs, and they're going to act as tabs, and they're going to be announced to assistive technology as tabs. And then I'm going to go down to my tab panels, which I'll have a class of panel. And I'm going to add a role on each of those of tab panel so that we now recognize each of these 3 containers here is a panel of our tabs. So this is just going to be role equals tab panel. Oh, it auto-completed for me? No, not quite. How do I use that autocomplete? There we go. Okay. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste that down to my other ones. Sorry, it's a little bit awkward to try to type with my microphone here. Okay. So now we are calling out the actual role, the actual tab role for each of these interface elements, right? So we've got a div which natively has no semantic role, no semantic meaning, and we've now assigned it a role of tab list. We've taken our 3 buttons that are acting as our little tabs that we click on to change the content, and we've overridden their native semantic role. It's no longer a button, it is now tab. And then we've taken each of our panels, which again are divs that have no semantic meaning out of the box, and we've added a role of tab panel to each of those. So now we're identifying for assistive technology the role that each of these elements is going to play once we get our tabs working. Adding those roles doesn't impart any actual interactive functionality to our tabs. We're still on the hook to do that. So we're still on the hook to write the JavaScript that's going to make the tab panel change when we click on the tabs, or activate them with the keyboard, whichever we're doing, or tap them on a touchscreen, right? We still need to handle that part, but at least now we can communicate with assistive technology what the role of each of the things that we're clicking on is. And as I mentioned earlier, we're using real button elements. And one benefit that we get of using real button elements is we automatically get support for keyboard. So if we tried to use divs there, as far as Aria is concerned, they would still have a role of tab, and they would communicate their role to assistive technology the same way. However, as far as we're concerned as developers building out that functionality, we would be on the hook to build in all of the button functionality that we would be missing. So changing that role of tab on the button changes their assistive technology role, but it doesn't change their HTML role. And it doesn't change the fact that if I have an actual semantic button, if I add an on-click listener in JavaScript, that listener is automatically going to fire as well in response to keyboard interactions without me having to write any extra code. If I made those divs with a role of tab, I would have to write JavaScript to handle the mouse interaction, listening for the clicks, and I would have to write JavaScript to handle the keyboard interactions. So listening for the space bar to be pressed, listening for the enter key to be pressed. And chances are I would miss one of those things. Because if you don't regularly navigate the web with a keyboard, you might not even realize that the space bar is an option for activating a button. And then you might forget it. And then that becomes very confusing for people later who are used to those interactions being there, that now they can't use your set of tabs the way that they normally would expect to. So that's why we're using rail buttons. So let's go ahead for where we are now, and we'll try this with the keyboard and we'll try it with the screen reader just real quick. So with the keyboard, I can tab to each of the tabs. I press the space bar, it does load the associated panels. So it still works the same way as it did before. We didn't change our JavaScript at all. So we didn't add any support for arrow keys or anything like that to our tab panels. But let's see if we can hear any difference in how these work now that if we fire up the screen reader.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Accessible tabs from scratch Google Chrome. Natalie, and digit 2, window. Description, selected, tab, 1 of 3, has keyboard focus. You are current.
Okay, so we heard at that time, we're selected, tab, 1 of 3. So now I know, even if I can't see the screen, that I'm inside a set of tabs. So just adding those roles made sure that that got announced to the screen reader correctly. So let me go through and I'll try to actually activate these buttons. We still have a lot of broken functionality, but we fixed one problem at least so far.
Shipping, selected, tab, 2 of 3. You are currently on a selected tab, 2 of 3. All
right, so it's nice that it at least tells me I'm in tabs. So let me go ahead and activate this shipping button. So we still have that problem where I hear the clicky sound. I know I activated the tab. It did change the tab visually. If you can see the screen, you can tell that it switched the tab, but the screen reader user didn't hear anything change or have any idea that anything is new. Now, our screen reader users might be more likely to figure out what's going on now because they at least know that they're in a set of tabs. So now they might be more likely to figure out, oh, that probably switched some content that's after this on the page, but we're still missing some important functionality. Oh, sorry. We're missing some important functionality. I forgot that was going to announce that I was turning it off and just talk right over me while I'm talking. All right. So now we did hear that the screen reader tried to tell us which tab was active, but of course it couldn't actually do a very good job of that because we're not actually telling assistive technology which tab is active. So what I want to do is by default, I want to make that description tab the active one. So I'm going to go ahead and add on this one an aria-selected. Whoops, it's hyphen. aria-selected. I don't understand how that autocomplete is supposed to work. Do I have to actually click it with my mouse? It's not very helpful. Equals true. Typo that haunts me forever. I always want to type TREU instead of UE. All right, so aria selected equals true. on the active tab. And then of course I want to have aria-selected equals false on the other tab. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and we'll paste it onto tab number 2 and tab number 3, except now we'll change this to false. All right, so now we have 1 active tab and 2 inactive tabs. Now we're going to have to add JavaScript that's actually going to toggle those states every time our active tab changes, because otherwise this only fires on page load and tells us that the first tab is active, but of course it's only active until somebody interacts with one of the other tabs and makes that the active tab. The next thing that we want to do is actually programmatically set up the relationship between our buttons that are acting as tabs and our tab panels. And because right now there's actually no relationship between those at all. Programmatically, like there's nothing that actually ties this button to this tab panel. So we're going to go ahead and wire that up. And each of our panels has an ID. So we had that already in our previous code. Maybe we were using it in the JavaScript before. So panel desk for the description one, panel ship for the shipping one, and panel returns for the returns one. And what I'm going to do is on the individual tabs, I'm going to add an aria-controls attribute that points at that panel's ID. So that's going to look like this. Aria-controls equals, and the description one is going to control panel desk. So now I know programmatically that this tab controls the panel with the ID of panel desk. So let me go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to put it on the other tabs, except update which panel they control. So the shipping tab controls panel ship, and the returns tab controls panel returns. All right, so now we've got that relationship explicitly wired up, and we know exactly that we have a relationship between 2 different elements on our page. The next thing that I want to do is make sure that each of my tab panels has an accessible name. And the handy thing is that the accessible name is already on our tabs, right? It's already the text that's inside of our tabs. So I can use aria-labelledby on each of my panels to point back to the tab that labels it to inherit that as its accessible name. So I'm going to add aria-labelledby. Okay, that worked that time. I don't know what's going on. Okay, aria-labelledby. And our buttons don't have IDs. So I'm going to actually get rid of this data panel. I don't need that. And I'm just going to replace that with an ID. And instead of panel, because that's already what our panels are called, I'm going to call it tab desk, right? So my ID of the description tab is tab desk. And I'm going to go ahead and replace data panel here for the shipping one so that the ID is tab ship and an ID here. And of course, if you're using tab returns, if you're using, a backend coding language, right, you could automatically output these with some kind of ID in a loop, right? You wouldn't have to hand code each one by one. Okay, so aria-labelledby, we're going to say that that's labeled by tab desk. And then let me copy this down to our other 2 tab panels. So this one is on tab ship, and this one should be tab returns. Right, so now we have an accessible name for each of our tab panels. It happens to match the H2 that's inside each one of those, and you absolutely could have used the H2s as the accessible names as well. You're not always going to have an H2 directly inside the tab panel, right? Like exactly what shows up in the tab panel is going to differ from site to site. So often it's the case that it makes sense to use whatever is on the tab, whatever text is actually on the tab for that name. So these changes here, where we added a few roles and we added some aria attributes, like these are what help us change a bunch of divs and buttons into a connected, coherent component that is going to announce itself correctly with assistive technology. So there is one more change that we need to make, which is we need to make sure that our tab panels are reachable via the keyboard. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to add a tab index of 0 on each one of those, because that is the expected behavior that I do not understand how this autocomplete works. Okay, that time it did what I expected. Who knows? All right, so tab index of 0 on each one of these tab panels. So here's my tab panel here, tab index of 0, and tab panel here, tab index of 0. So basically, once I have switched to the tab that I want, hitting the tab key once more should take me directly into the tab panel and not take me through the rest of the tabs, right? But take me direct. I should be able to skip now directly into the tab panel, directly into that content and get that content. All right, so we haven't updated our JavaScript yet, but I'm going to go ahead and switch to my step 1, which is all of that stuff that we just did together, all done, but now with the JavaScript updated to handle the aria-selected change. And I think that is probably the only, well, and then to handle the switching of the actual tab panels, right? So our JavaScript is handling that. We can look at the JavaScript together in just a moment, but I just wanted to switch my demo here back to, okay, stage 1, roles and relationships. And I just wanted to demo this quickly to show what difference we have now for keyboard users and for screen reader users, having just added our roles and accessible names to the interface. So let's see. So I'm still tabbing between all of the tabs because we haven't handled that yet. We'll do that next. So we'll add support for the arrow key to navigate between tabs. I go to shipping. So really for a keyboard user at this point, not much has changed. Let's listen to what's changed for a screen reader user. So let me fire up the screen reader.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Accessible tabs from scratch Google Chrome. Natalie. And digit 2. Window. Description. Selected. Tab. 1 of 3. Has keyboard focus. You are currently on a...
Okay, so I stopped it there. It was going to say it again. You are currently on a selected tab 1 of 3. Right, so we've got that going for us. Let me go ahead and go to the shipping tab and activate it, and we'll see what happens.
Shipping. Tab. 2 of 3. You are currently on a tab. 2 selected.
So now we heard it announce that my tab was selected. So now I understand, oh, I switched selected tabs. And I knew, and it was announced to me that I'm in a set of tabs. I've got 3 tabs. I can move between them, and I can select one of them and activate it because our aria-selected attribute is going to change. So let me go out of the screen reader.
VoiceOver off.
And let's take a look at the JavaScript that's happening here. Oops. There we go. All right. So it's still just 10 lines of JavaScript, so we don't have a ton going on. So the first thing we're doing is selecting our tabs and panels, and using the dot annotation to get those back as an array. And I'm using the aria roles to select those because that makes it really nice and easy. Now, obviously, if I had multiple sets of tabs, this wouldn't work, but I've got one set of tabs on the page, so that's how we're going to make it work. You would obviously have to be more specific with your query if you had to try to make multiple sets of tabs work on the same page. And then we've got a simple function. I'm going to skip over that for now and just go down here to tabs. So we're going through each tab. We're adding an event listener. We're listening for a click. which again, that's all we have to do because we're getting our keyboard support for free because we used a semantic button element. If I had a div instead of a button, I would also have to listen for keyboard events as well. But I have a native button, so I don't have to do that. And on that click, I'm going to call this activate function, which we'll go back here now and take a look at. I'm going to pass the tab that was just activated or clicked or tapped or whatever. I'm going to pass that to my activate function. So I'm passing the tab. And I'm going to say tabs for each. I'm going to set the aria-selected to whether or not t equals the current tab. So if I'm on the current tab, it will be true. And if I'm not on the current tab, it'll be false, right? It will set all the others to false. And then I'm going to look through each of the panels and similar code. I'm going to get all of those panels and figure out, am I on the current one? And if I'm not, I'm going to hide that panel, right? So that only the current panel is the one that's actually visible. And you can see that we're using the aria-controls attributes. So those attributes are also helpful little handles for us to use in our JavaScript for selecting different types of elements. So that's all it takes to actually get that working and get our get the tabs working. They work for keyboard users, kind of. That's what we're going to do next. We're going to tackle the support for those arrow keys next. And for screen reader users, they're correctly announcing that we're using tabs. They're correctly announcing that one of the tabs is active. And then, oh, I also did want to show that I can tab. You can see right now, I can tab now to the tab panel. So I can very easily get to whatever the new content is. Now, that'll get even more useful once we get the arrow key support put in there. So let me go ahead and jump ahead to the keyboard and let's talk about that. Let me just bring up my notes here. All right, so generally what you want to do in a where you have a set of components are you, well, I guess that's true. Buttons are components. So we've got a set of components, but they're part of a larger component, right? They're part of a larger interactive component, which is our tabs. And I don't want my keyboard tab to land on each one of those individually. I want it to only land basically on the one that's active right now. And then I want to be able to use my arrow keys to move between them so that I have that expected keyboard interaction. And then when I hit tab again, I'm not tabbing to the next tab. I'm actually tabbing to the tab panel that I just activated. So it's really easy for me to get around the page and go straight to the new content that I just exposed. And how we accomplish that, and this is true of tabs, but it's also true of a lot of other types of interactive components that we might build that have multiple nested things, whether it's buttons or links or other types of interactive elements inside, where I don't want to have to tab through each one of those to get through that component. So we use what we call a roving tab index, which is I'm going to keep toggling that tab index so that only the active tab has a tab index of 0 on it at any given time. So that way the whole tab list is one stop in the tab order, and it's not one tab stop per tab. That's getting a little confusing because I'm talking about the tab key on the keyboard and tabs, but I hope you know what I mean. If you don't, you can post a question in the chat. So we want our active tab to have a tab index of 0 and all other tabs to have a tab index of -1. So it's just another attribute on the tabs that we have to toggle when we switch the tabs. And then of course we have to listen for that arrow key press on the keyboard. So the arrow key should move the focus and move that tab index of 0 to the next element. Now, you might think, well, what difference does it make, right? Like, why can't somebody just tab through all the tabs? Well, in my example, it's relatively simple with 3 tabs. And yeah, it's probably not that much of a hassle to have to tab through all of them. But there are interfaces with maybe a dozen tabs or more. And you can imagine if every single time you wanted to get past those tabs to get to content that came after them on the page, you had to tab through all of those. That's just annoying. And there's no real reason that you would need to do it. Because, like I said, that's not even the expected keyboard behavior. So, what we would generally expect is that left arrows would move focus backward. And when you get to the first element and you hit the left arrow again, of course, we're talking for people who read a left to right language, you can have the tab stop there so that hitting left on the first tab doesn't do anything. That's an option. Or you can wrap it back around to the end. And that's true of the other way as well. So if you go right, and you get to the last tab, you can make it so hitting right again doesn't do anything, or you can make it so hitting right again actually loops you back around to the first tab. Either one is fine. It's also a really nice touch if you wire up the home and end buttons for people who have keyboards who have those buttons, which I know they don't exist on most laptops, but I use an extended keyboard with home and end buttons. And it's really nice if I can just say home to skip to the first tab and end to skip to the last tab. And once again, if I hit tab key again, once I'm in that set of tabs, that should jump me out of the tab list to the active panel and not to the next tab. And then, of course, hitting enter or space key should activate the focus tab. We're going to get that interaction for free, basically, because we used button elements instead of divs for our tabs. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I actually have examples here wired up for you that we could take a look at, is there are 2 different ways of activating tabs, and they are both acceptable for, from an accessibility point of view. So it's really up to you. Oh, I need to change. So I have a sample here of automatic tab activation, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So with automatic tab activation, so this example is wired up correctly so that if I hit tab, you can see that I go to the tab panel. And if I hit the arrow key, I go to the other tabs. And automatic activation means that the tab panel switches the moment that I arrow onto a tab. This is ideal if all of your panels are already loaded in the background. And so switching is basically instantaneous. And this requires fewer keystrokes. So it's a little bit easier and faster to use. We also have manual activation, which is this one. Let me demo that one really quick. So here I'm going to arrow key to the shipping, and you can see that it did not automatically switch to the shipping tab. I have to activate the button. So I can hit the space bar or I can hit the enter key. Either one works. And then I activate the button. So arrowing only moves the focus on the tab. It doesn't actually activate that tab. So generally, you would want to use this approach when activating a tab is more expensive, like if I'm doing an AJAX call to get the content of that tab, right? I don't have it already loaded. So that way, users can, use the arrows all they want to go between the tabs, and it's not costing me all those requests to the back end to load up that information. You want to be deliberate about it, and you want to think about the user experience there. But from an accessibility point of view, both of those are perfectly fine. They would both pass an accessibility test with no problem. So just to let you know that we have both of those options. But I do want to go ahead and go to the script 2 automatic.js so that we could take a look at that, how we're handling the tab index there. So we've got our tab list, our tabs, and our panels that we're selecting up at the top of the document. And then I'm going to skip down here to the bottom to look at what we're actually calling, and then we'll go back and look at those functions. So for my tabs, again, for each, I'm listening for a click event. And again, I don't have to handle keyboard events because I get those for free because I used a button element. And here I'm going to call the activate function. So let's look at that activate function. I am passing a tab to it and saying setting focus true or false. Going through each of the tabs, whether or not it's selected, I'm now setting that separately. And now I'm setting my aria-selected attribute to be equal to selected, which this would return true. If the selected tab is the current tab, it returns false otherwise. So my aria-selected is going to be true for the current tab and false otherwise. And at the exact same time, I just toggle that tab index between 0 and -1, which is our roving tab index, so that our currently selected tab has the tab index of 0 and becomes a tab stop when we're hitting the tab key on the keyboard, and the other tab gets a -1 and is removed from that keyboard focus order. And then I have the same code as before for finding the correct panel, the one that's associated with the tab that we just activated, and showing it if it's the active one, hiding it otherwise. And then if I want to set focus on the tab, if I have set focus here, which I didn't, I said false, it would set focus on the tab. All right, so the keyboard arrows here. So now this is why we have this extra element up here for the tab list, because we're just using that. We're going to listen for the whole tab list for a key down event. So using event delegation, and on key down, we're going to get the active element. And if it's nothing, then we're just going to keep going. We're not going to do anything. All right. So then we're going to listen. If it's arrow right, we're going to go to another key to the right, or loop around back to the beginning. If it's arrow left, again, we're going to go one tab to the left, or loop around back to the beginning. The home is going to take us to the first tab, and it's going to take us to the last tab. And we have prevent default and then activate. So we're calling that same activate function again. So that is how our roving tab index works. So it is more JavaScript, although we're still only at about 34 lines to get fully functional tabs. And that's, vanilla JS. So let's go ahead and fire up. This is manual activation. Let's listen to this in a screen reader and see what we get.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Accessible tabs from scratch Google Chrome. Natalie, and digit 2, window. Returns, tab, 3 of 3, has keyboard focus. You are currently on a tab, 3 of 3. To select this option, press Control, Option, Space.
All right, so let me go ahead and activate this returns tab.
Selected.
And I hear that it's selected. And if I move along to the next item in the DOM.
Product information, tab returns, tab panel. You are currently on a tab panel inside of a frame.
So I understand now, this is the tab panel associated with that tab that I just clicked. So it's being communicated to me that I've got a set of tabs. There's 3 of them. I'm on the active one. I can hear when I activate it, I hear it was selected. I have a much better idea of what's going on the screen than what we had at the very beginning of the stream. So let me turn the screen reader back off.
VoiceOver off.
All right. And then I just wanted to kind of demo some keyboard interactions here. So if I hit the left arrow key, I go back and it's going to loop me around. So I can hit the left arrow key forever and just move between these 3 options. The right arrow key moves me the other direction. And again, this one is coded to loop back around. That's your option. You could loop back around, or you could just stop once you get to the end. If I hit the home key on my keyboard, I skip back to the first tab. The end key on the keyboard skips forward to the last tab. So it's really easy to get between them. And then once I have selected the one I want, because this is manual activation, so I want shipping, and I hit tab again, I end up inside that tab panel that I just selected. So that is the expected behavior of how tabs would work with the keyboard. So now I have that. I have everything working exactly the way that I want. And I don't have to try to figure out how does this particular set of tabs work. It all works as expected, the way that I would expect any other interactive component to operate, right? So tab into it, arrow keys within it, tab back out. All right, so I do want to talk about a few common failures that happen. So one is forgetting that we have to update that aria-selected attribute in the JavaScript. So easy here. On line number 8, we have that happening. So we're going to update aria-selected so that our current tab has aria-selected true and all the other tabs have aria-selected false. And a nice benefit is you can also use those same aria attributes as selectors in your CSS. So if you want to style your current tab differently, you can use aria-selected equals true as a selector in the CSS and add some extra styles to the currently selected one. And then we have the roving tab index, which is just toggling the tab index between 0 and -1, 0 on the same one that is selected on the current tab, and -1 on the tabs that aren't selected, so that we only have one tab stop using the tab key when we get to that set of tabs. We don't have to tab through all of them. We just tab into the tabs, hit tab again, and we're back out of them. So if there's 20 tabs or 12 tabs, we don't have to tab through all of them to get past that interface control. Another really common thing that happens is if I go back to the HTML markup, let's go to the automatic one. We have the aria-controls, which unfortunately is on a line break. There we go. Aria-controls, right, which is how our buttons get programmatically associated with the tab panels that they control. So make sure that that name matches the ID of the panel exactly. So you can't get creative there. It has to match because a typo is a broken relationship and it's actually a little bit hard to catch and debug. So just make sure that your aria-controls value matches the value of the ID on the associated tab panel exactly. Another common failure is using divs instead of buttons for our tabs. You have to do a lot of extra work. You have to add a lot of extra JavaScript if that's what you're going to do. And you also have to add a tab index on those, which in this case, we're using a tab index anyway. But to make sure that they're focusable, they need a tab index. And then a div is not going to handle anything with the keyboard, right? Where you saw my JavaScript, all I'm handling is a click on the button. I don't have any special handling for, listening for a spacebar, listening for an enter key. The only special handling that we added is the arrow, support for the arrow keys. But to actually activate the buttons, I didn't have to write any extra code. I was able to just listen for the click event, and that's going to automatically fire when a keyboard user hits enter or spacebar when they have one of those buttons focused. And then another common mistake is in how you hide the panels that aren't visible right now. If you hide them by setting negative margin of 99999 EMs, that content is still going to be accessible in the tab order and in the page. And it will be very confusing for keyboard users and for screen reader users to be hearing content that's supposed to be hidden, right? That's visually hidden on the screen. So you want to say aria hidden on it. You want to say display none on it, or you want to say visibility none, right? So one of those things will actually hide it from assistive technology, from keyboard focus, from screen readers, etc. If you hide it in another way by setting the height to 0 and overflow to none, if you hide it by, like I said, positioning it off the screen, if you hide it by setting the opacity to 0, right? There's all different ways of hiding content on the web, and those methods of like setting opacity or setting position or setting height do not remove that content from the accessibility tree. Basically, that is still available. If you have links inside that content, I will still be able to tab with my keyboard to those tabs or those links, but I won't be able to visually see them. So it's very confusing. So you want to pay attention to what method you're actually using to hide those inactive panels. All right, and then we have 5 minutes left. So I am just going to show you my one last example that I have, which is vertical tabs. Because tabs do not have to be horizontal across the screen. So let's go take a look at the vertical tabs. So this is very similar markup, styled differently with CSS. And instead of using the left and right arrow keys, I use the up and down arrow keys. So if I tab to description and I hit the down arrow, I can move through those, or the up arrow will move through those as well. Home still goes to the first and end still goes to the last. Now, it is up to you. You could support both the up arrow key and the left arrow key, regardless of whether you have horizontal or vertical orientation visually of your tabs. You could support both up and left to go basically backward through your tabs, and then down and right. You could support both for going forward through the tabs. That's perfectly fine. It's also fine to just support whichever one matches the orientation, because that's the one users are probably most likely to use. So this is also an option. And if we go look at the script for vertical, right, the only difference in the code is that we're supporting arrow down and arrow up instead of arrow left and arrow right, is the only difference that we have in the code. All right. So let me go ahead and wrap up for today. I'm going to go ahead and put the HTML back on the screen because I think that's probably the most helpful for most people. And I will share the link to this CodePen. It's public. So anybody can come over here and take a look and play around with it. You know, if you're not familiar with CodePen, you can create your own account and you can find like an example like mine. You can like fork it basically to your own account, similar to like GitHub, and then have a copy of this in your own workspace that you can play around with. And you can also live edit mine. Now you won't be able to save the changes, right? But if you look at mine, if you just go to my link, you could play around with changing things and see what happens. And then if you refresh the page, mine will just be back. So you lose any edits you made, but that can be a fun way, and you know, a really fun and safe way to play around with something if you're not sure what's going to happen. So to recap everything that we covered today. So tabs have no native HTML element. So it is a case where if you want a correctly functioning set of tabs on a page, you do need to use aria, and we need to use the roles. So we used tab list, we used tab panel, and we used tab. So our roles. Let's go back over there to where I added those. There we go. A role of tab list on the overall container, a role of tab on the individual tabs, and then a role of tab panel on each of our containers. We want to use a roving tab index to make sure that we correctly support the arrow key navigation, so that one tab into the set of tabs, another tab to move out of them, so that our keyboard users aren't stuck tabbing through every single one of our tabs, right? Using the tab key to get through every single tab. We don't want them to have to do that. And then the only way to know if a tabs component is truly accessible is to test it out yourself with a keyboard and a screen reader, which you should have information to know how to do that now. You should know what the expected interactions are. If you forget, there's actually Charlie Chirplet has I forget what it's called now. Let's see here. It's not the book on it. Atomic Accessibility. This one. So we go to the HTML tab, and then go all the way down, tab group. And you check that, it will add over here and tell you exactly what interactions a set of tabs should support for keyboard and for screen reader. So this tells me here, keyboard for mobile and desktop browsers. When I use the tab key to move focus to a tab, I see focus is visually indicated. If tab activation is manual, then I use the left and right keys. I see the focus moves to other tabs, and I can use the spacebar or enter key to activate the tab. If activation is automatic, I use the left and arrow keys. I see the tabs get activated. And then when I use the tab key, I see focus move to the activated tab panel. So that's exactly the interaction that I just demoed for you. And you can give it a try for yourself when you go visit the code pen. Actually, let me drop the link for that in there right now. Copy URL. Drop that in the comments right now, and give me a second because LinkedIn is a little bit more picky about it. LinkedIn doesn't make it easy. YouTube and Facebook make it easy. Oh yeah, I meant to mention that I do live stream on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn simultaneously. So if you have problems on one of the platforms, sometimes what's really helpful is to jump over to one of the other ones. Oops, got lost on LinkedIn here. Sorry. What? I don't know why LinkedIn makes this so difficult. Okay, there we go. I can share that link to the code pen. Okay, oh, that's on LinkedIn. That was so much work. Okay. So you can give that a try, and then it will also tell you for the screen reader. When I use a desktop screen reader and I use the tab key to move focus to a tab, I hear its label and its purpose is clear. I hear it identifies itself as a tab. I hear it expresses its state, selected, pressed, or checked. And then again, if the tab activation is manual, I can hear the focus moves to the other tabs, and space or enter activates the tab. If activation is automatic, using the left or right arrow keys, I hear the tabs get activated. And then when I use the tab key, I hear focus move to the activated tab panel. So you can see that he's got, I don't know, dozens of different types of interface components. And if you're unclear how they should work with keyboard or with a screen reader, this is a great free resource where you can come and take a look at this and learn exactly what interaction should be supported. And you can check multiple, and then they all pile up in this section here so that you can have all of them together, and then you can quick copy them out. So if you're creating a Jira ticket or an Asana ticket or whatever, you can actually provide that very easily to the developer who's going to be in charge of building that out. So I did want to make sure that I shared that resource with you because I find it extremely helpful. Thank you so much for joining me today for building some accessible tabs from scratch. I hope that you learned something. Join me again 2 weeks from today. So again, I live stream every other Wednesday. My name is Natalie McLeese. I'm founder of Aardvark, an accessibility testing platform. You can give it a try if you have a website that you would like to test for accessibility. Otherwise, I will see you 2 weeks from today. I don't know what the topic is going to be. There is something it might be, but I don't want to say it yet in case it falls through, but it could be very exciting. It's always exciting, but every stream I do is very exciting, right? All right. So 2 weeks from today, thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you soon, and I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful 2 weeks until we see each other again. Thank you so much.